In question 5, we are asked to use the extended credit card data set, and we have several tasks to perform. So in many ways this is just an extension of the previous question that we were working on, where we analysed interest rates by themselves, except now we're going to have a look at interest rates as well as rewards. So for part A, we have to construct a contingency table for interest rate and rewards. We've then got to turn that contingency table into various charts so that we can think about which displays the relationship, if any, and we can then think about whether there is a relationship between interest rates and rewards. So as mentioned, it does follow on quite nicely from our question 4, where we just considered the interest rates. Now in question 5, we get to think about how rewards may be related to those patterns that we saw in our histogram from question 4. So let's start with part A. We've got to make a contingency table, and that means starting with a pivot table. We've got interest rates as one variable and rewards as the other. Now, although interest rate is numerical, rewards is categorical, and so we cannot use a scatter plot. Scatter plots only work if we've got numerical versus numerical. So here we have to begin with a contingency table, and then we can move into either clustered or stacked bar charts. So mouse on cell A1, top left hand corner, we go to Insert, Pivot Table, and I'm going to put this onto a new worksheet. Now, I'm going to drag both interest rates and rewards into my table. So because I've got two variables, one will go in the rows, one will go in the columns, and the order we put them in will have an impact. So let's do this firstly with rewards in the rows, then interest rates in the columns. And now for interest rates, certainly we don't want all those individual numbers, so we have to right click, go in and do the grouping, and we can use the same grouping that we had in question 4. Now that creates our basic table. It doesn't matter which of those two fields we drag into the data items area, either interest rates or rewards program. Because we've already specified the rows and the columns, it will count regardless of which of the two we drag into the middle. Now just double check once again that it has indeed counted, and it has. So there's our contingency table. Now I want to create a second contingency table, and so I'll just go back through that process, and I'm going to in fact put this one below the one we've already created, just so that we can compare. What happens if we put rewards and interest rates around the other way? So interest rate into the rows and rewards into the columns. Well, again, I can create that chart, just double check that it's counted. Both are contingency tables. Both give me information about the possible relationship between these two variables. So in many ways it comes down to, well, which is our primary focus, which is our secondary. Here we're focusing initially on interest rates and then thinking about how rewards may or may not be related to the interest rates. And it will have an impact also on the actual chart that we create, in that when we have our stacked or clustered, one variable will be on the horizontal axis, one will be represented using different colours, and so depending on which chart we have, that will impact on the actual depending on which table we have, which ordering, that will impact on the chart. So in fact, if we start with interest rate in the rows and rewards in the columns, so this second contingency table that I made, and we turn that into a pivot chart, let's start with the clustered. Now I won't worry about formatting these, just so that we can focus on what we're seeing. Now here, what we've got is something that looks like the histogram from question 4, but now we've separated those classes into yes and no for rewards. So we've got the two different colours. And in many ways that's quite nice, because it does then link into what we've already seen in question 4. If, however, we had used the first pivot table with interest rate in the columns and rewards in the rows, in fact I'll make the pivot chart on the screen at the same time, so in fact let's just move them so we can see which goes with which. Our first contingency table gives us a chart which is almost like a little mini histogram for the no rewards cards next to a mini histogram for the yes rewards cards, and then the different interest rates are represented by the different colours. Now we can change the actual colours being used to something where, say here with the reds, it's darker if it's a lower rate and lighter if it's a higher rate. And certainly we can just focus on the no cards, we can just focus on the yes cards, and we can see that no cards tend to be dominated by the lower rates and yes cards tend to be dominated by the higher rates. So that's quite useful. But if we'd already seen the histogram, which we have in question 4, that may just be enough to make us want to use the one that looks more like the histogram shape, so based on the interest rates in the rows and the rewards in the columns. In the end, it does come down a little bit to personal preference, but you do have to think about those issues of, have you already done some analysis? Have you gone a particular way with representing the variables? But it's nice to try different things and see what the options are. So they're the two clustered bar charts that you would have come up with. We can just click on each chart and change the chart type to see a stacked. So let's just change both of those to a stacked. Now here, the problem is that we in fact have more cards with rewards than cards without rewards. So it can be a little bit hard to compare the stacked charts, regardless of the sort of row and column ordering. But we can fix that type of problem by changing to a 100% stacked chart. Now that changes everything over to percentages. I'll just change both of those. And so that means that now we're looking at percentage comparisons rather than the actual sort of subsample size for the different groups. And that can make the comparison a little bit easier as well. I mean, if we have a look at this lower 100% stack chart, you can clearly see that when we're looking at those lower interest rates that we've got mostly blue, so it's indicating that they're dominated by the no rewards cards. As we get to the higher rates, we're seeing that the rewards cards are dominating those particular levels. Now that basically covers all the different combinations of those three charts, and depending on whether you had the rows and the columns around a particular way. So while we have talked about sort of which is best, just to sort of finish off and make sure that we've covered off on part D, if we had already considered the distribution of interest rates, such as what we did do in question 4, with the view to then adding in rewards to see the impact, potentially the charts produced from the contingency table with interest rates in the rows and rewards in the columns would be preferred, as it helps us by allowing more easy comparison with the original histogram. The stack chart is the same shape as the histogram, but with each bar class split into the yes-no divisions, and the clustered is like having the two separate histograms on the one chart, and the 100% is based on percentages, and they do allow easy comparison. So overall, depending again on what you're actually going to put in your analysis, any of those could be quite useful and would allow you to have a great visual to go with what you're discussing. And just to finish off, part E, is there a relationship? Well, yes. Higher rate cards tend to have rewards programs, while lower rate cards tend not to have reward programs. And certainly if we just looked at the raw data, that would have been very hard to see, but going through this process of initially analysing just interest rates by itself, seeing that not all interest rates are the same, then thinking about the impact of rewards and seeing that pattern, that really helps us to build up a good picture of what's going on in this market.